I have never been a confident swimmer. In kiddie swim classes, it took me a long time for me to be willing to let go of the edge of the pool, weeks of convincing for me to give up the floaties on my arms, and no amount of encouragement or demonstration could get me to put my face underwater. I just didn't trust it. I remember later being maybe 9 years old at a summer camp with a lake, and our swim instructor was trying to teach us how to float. Just lay back, she said. The water will hold you. It's so peaceful, just looking up at the clouds and floating. What do I remember about that experience? I remember struggle, lots of struggle. I would be treading water and then I'd start to lean back, and just as I was almost horizontal, I would start flailing about, panicked that I would go under, that the water wouldn't hold me. Relax, the instructor would tell me. It's supposed to be restful. You're making it harder. But I didn't trust that I'd stay afloat without my own power, so I'd return to treading water. And treading water is exhausting, and my legs would cramp up. And then pretty soon I just started to hate swim time in the lake. The first time that I remember floating without fear and without flailing was when I was about 18 years old. It was at the Dead Sea in Israel, and the salt content there is so high that everyone floats, whether you like it or not. You can sit up and read a newspaper in it, and the salt water will hold you up. When I waded into that water and sat down and lay back, I noticed that my first instincts were still to tense every muscle in my body to keep myself afloat, like I would need to work hard. But slowly, consciously, I relaxed my muscles and trusted. The water held me. No flailing, only floating. This past spring, coping with the pandemic shutdowns felt a lot like flailing. A lot of frantic energy trying to keep ourselves afloat in our daily lives and work lives, as well as for our church. A lot of clinging to a hope that things would get back to normal in just a few weeks, or in just a few months, or by the end of the summer, or ... And here we are. The seasons turn and we enter autumn. I'm thinking of rivers. There's a saying that I first learned from a Disney movie. You can't step in the same river twice. The river's always flowing, always changing. In that beautiful Peter Mayer song that we just heard, he said, God is a river, not just a stone. God is a wild, raging rapid and a slow, meandering flow. God is a deep and narrow passage and a peaceful, sandy shoal. God is a river swimmer, so let go. The river invites us to a practice of surrender. Not surrender as in giving up, but surrender as in to stop flailing and clinging to what we wish were so. And instead, to acknowledge what is true in this very moment, to be open to change, to go with the flow. UU minister and musician Meg Barnhouse shared a great story about her second time in a canoe. She was on a river in Virginia at a canoe workshop, and the whole purpose of this workshop was to teach people how to paddle. Meg writes, "The river was low because of a drought that year, quite low. We put our canoes in at a bend where the river was deep enough for us to paddle around in pairs. I got instructions on the proper way to get into a canoe, the motion of the paddle, the knack of coordinating with my paddling partner, the rhythm and glide. For a couple of hours, we paddled in pairs, and then it was time for solo work. By this time, we were downriver a bit, and the instructors sat all in one canoe. They paddled fast down a stretch of river and then turned sideways so they could help us by shouting suggestions. I don't know where the other participants were, back up the river, I think, but I was trying to get to where the instructors were. The water was so shallow that I couldn't get much pressure with the paddle. It kept slipping through the water or knocking against the rocks on the bottom. "Try paddling faster," they shouted. I stepped it up and the canoe moved maybe a foot forward. Meg continues, "I come from a culture that believes in trying hard. I was taught that success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. And it's true, of course, except when it's not. I paddled fast and furious on that drought-stricken stretch of river until I noticed the instructors laughing. 'You can get out and just walk it down here to where the water's deeper,' they shouted." Oh. Meg brings the story home with this point about surrendering to what is. She says, "Sometimes we try too hard or in the wrong way. We push too hard, poke at things too much, take on things that aren't ours, or take over when we're not supposed to. I'm going to plan in my life not to try so hard in water that's too shallow. I have asked my inner wisdom to throw that picture up on my inner screen when I'm in that kind of situation, working the paddles through that inch and a half of water, hearing the divine instructors, the angel guides, up ahead, just guffawing. My beloveds of all souls, we are in a time of change and uncertainty. The river of life is always changing and flowing. But right now, yeah, it sure feels like we're in the rapids. I invite us into the practice of surrender. Not to give up, but to tell the truth about what is so. The pandemics of both COVID-19 and systemic racism still are all around us. Right now, people going back to school, whether as students or teachers or staff, is an exceptionally risky experiment, and we don't know yet how it will turn out. The country is on fire, and skies in the West Coast are red. The election is coming up, and it is very important. And we aren't back in church the way that many of us hoped that we would be by now. This is all true. But if we stop flailing at it, paddling in water that is too shallow, where might we be able to direct our energy? There's a school of thought called process theology, which says that there is a creative force unfolding in the universe, calling us to become all that we might be. Some call that creative force God. And if God is the river, or life is the river, what are we being led to? Can we open ourselves to see a possibility for what we might become. Instead of clinging to the idea that we've got to get back to how we're used to things being as quickly as possible, can we be carried by the current of change forward? Maybe even forward to something better. Can we be carried by the current into the racial justice work that has been gaining so much momentum right now and find our place in that great wave? Can we harness the power of our hopes and fears about this upcoming election and let it fuel our efforts to get out the vote so that we wake up on election day, each of us, with no regrets for having done our part? Can we keep finding new ways of doing church, of staying connected, of using old tools of spiritual wisdom along with new technologies? In this time that calls us to devotion and to flexibility, we invoke the words of the Serenity Prayer. Grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I close with an echo of the words we opened with from Reverend Manish Mishra Marzetti. Here, in front, beside, behind, each a passenger, each a captain, doing the best we can. Rest here in your boat with me, the river calls. Listen to how I flow, the sound of life coursing all around you. Let the current hold you. Let the current guide you. The river that gently flows through your soul whispers, we are in this together. So may it be. Amen.